a proud member of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
Welcome back to another episode of the Film Appraisers. This is a podcast for film lovers, and yeah, it's the only one that evaluates your favorite films. What does that mean? I mean, come on. It's all in the title, guys. Each episode, we discuss a film, and we appraise it in each of the following categories: narrative, music, technique, uniqueness, and longevity. Each category can receive a maximum of $20,000 for a possible $100,000 for the perfect film. And then we see where it stands next to the classics and other films brought to us by guests or listeners. My name is Josh, and today we are going to talk about a film that is considered by some to be a film classic, definitely an all-time great when it comes to the horror genre. It's the 1981 debut feature film from Sam Raimi. It's The Evil Dead, and this is starring Bruce Campbell as the awesome Ash Williams, Ellen Sandwise, Richard DeManicore, Betsy Baker, Teresa Tilley, and a ton of people who play the fake Shump. It's our Halloween special. This is episode 26, Ash, Gas, or Grass. Nobody stays in this cabin for free. No.
It wasn't ready for that.
That's your Halloween prank. Just playing, everybody. This is episode 26, a lot tamer, cabin, cellar, and book. Yeah, pretty bland and boring. And you heard him there, folks. Joining me today is your co-host, a man that I know he would not hesitate to use a chainsaw to dismember his demonically possessed girlfriend that's tied to a workbench in the backwoods Tennessee cabin, knowing that she will come back to attack him if he does not go through with the heinous act. It's Joe Kane, folks.
Hey, I'm pretty sure half the budget of this film went to running smoke machines.
Yeah, and a little bit of special effects when they go across the moon. You see that fake smoke go across the moon a lot.
Yeah.
Man, I worked on that intro for you for a long time. Happy Halloween. It's a mouthful. Can't believe I said it all.
It sounded like you run out of breath. I appreciate it.
I did a tad bit. So, do we need to wait on Todd? Is he going to join us?
No, I think Todd's doing yard work. I'm not sure. He said something about some vines in the woods. I don't know.
Oh, yeesh. The vines.
I know, the vines.
I don't even want to start there.
It was 1981. Anyways, that wouldn't fly now.
It would not fly now. Not even in a horror film. All right, Joe, it is no secret how much I like this film. I think everybody heard it. And I know you like it too, but why is it? What's up with Evil Dead? Like, why do you like this film?
So this is, I mean, if anybody recalls my previous sentiments on horror movies, this is really one of the only ones I like.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a few reasons for that. It's like a weird combination of like being really earnest, and there's also like more than a little campiness, and it's creative, and there's a ton of effort, and it feels scrappy. Like, this is like it's I mean, like all kinds of things. Like, it was lower budget, and if you can tell it's lower budget, but the movie doesn't really suffer from it. And there's little things. It feels like some trivia, like the whole crew was sleeping in that cabin the whole time they filmed. Like, right, they were just piled on top of each other in that little cabin for this whole, like, it's just little things that show creative solutions here and there. And honestly, it is, I mean, I'm going to foreshadow here or just spoil the end of the episode or whatever, but the cinematography in this film is far better than it deserves.
Yeah.
And I think it combines in a way that just makes this, it lands more in the fun to watch than scary bucket. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of Sam Raimi DNA showing up in it.
Yeah.
The way he does things. And I don't know if he knew that was his DNA already. I mean, he was only 20 when he made this, and that's crazy. Yeah. I don't know if he knew that was going to be his DNA or if he was like finding it naturally here. He leans way into it in the franchise going forward, but it's just a little bit of that here. And I think it's a great balance, and it's just a really fun movie to watch.
Yeah, it is fun. It probably has become more fun over the years with individuals because, when it first came out, they were just saying, "Oh, it's the scariest film you've ever seen," and things like that. And then we saw in Evil Dead 2, they started pumping in some of that comedy, like you're talking about, even heavier, like noticeably
Very heavy, yeah.
But as the life of this film has grown, and as the longevity of this has grown, it does feel a little bit more campier now. There's some parts that probably weren't intended to be funny then. Maybe they're a little bit funnier now. But yeah, I totally agree. With me, it's no secret. I mean, it's the technique of this thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a horror fan.
I'm not really either.
It's not my thing. Unless you come up with something completely new, like Scream or like Get Out. Like those kinds of, when you come up with something completely new like that, I'll enjoy it. But this, like in the case of this film, the camera work is so phenomenal and it's so unexpected.
And it's phenomenal from like the 4-second mark in the film. It starts out that way. Yeah, immediately.
Exactly. I remember when I first watched this film, it was actually after I had been introduced to kind of the art of film analysis, and I saw this film, and like my jaw dropped. And you combine that with knowing that it's from a first-time filmmaker.
From a dude who just turned 20, who had, I think, $300,000.
Yeah, right.
Like, this is wild. It's wild that this is what came out of that.
Yeah, and now don't get us wrong. I think you will notice, well, you'll definitely notice because we'll tell you when we get to the point where we do our rankings that it's not a perfect film by any means. It's got some serious challenges when it comes to our other categories, but not with technique. It's up there. I mean, that's not really foreshadowing. We're telling you it's going to be high. As K2SO says, it's really high, right?
Yes.
Hey, how long would you have lasted in that cabin? Like, let's just say, like when they're in the scene when the cellar door flies open, would you have lasted?
So here is a thing that I actually wrote in my notes that I'm going to find it so I can quote it exactly how I wrote it, so it does not sound like I adapted it to what you just asked me. I wrote, if I think I ever walked into a place and saw that there was a floor hatch that had an elaborate setup of chains to hold it closed from the outside, I would immediately leave. So I don't think I would have made it into the first night. Like, what floor hatch has like 6 eyelets and like a huge chain to hold it down? Like, no, that's a murder pit. Get out. Leave now.
It is a murder pit. That's a very fair. The chains are on the outside. It's never a good
There's
sign.
something in this basement that shouldn't be coming out of it. Oh, okay. I'm not going to sleep right next to that hole in the floor.
So you mean you also, if you had made it, you wouldn't like go put on your robe and go seek out what's in the woods when you hear "join us" whispered to you?
No, I wouldn't have gotten that far. I 100%. Like, I'm not trying to act tough or anything. I would have seen that hatch in the floor, looked around that cabin and been like, oh, this isn't for me. I mean, also all the weird, like, hanging effigies and stuff. Like, no, this is the wrong place. We came to the wrong place. Let's go. I think it's a good time to go.
Right. Yeah. Logic aside, though, that's what makes those films, like, really fun, right? Because, I mean, they're entertainment, just like any film. But films, when you take into account, like this, like the cinema, like the communal experience when you're at the cinema, that's what makes these films fun, because it's those experiences.
It's the continuing to fall for the demon, pretending they're not sick anymore over and over again. Yeah. Oh, just help me. Or like, how many times do you bury the girl? Like,
right.
Like, no, this isn't working. Just cut her up.
Did you find that the film, kind of watching it with I don't want to say critique because we're not film critics, like we don't do that, but I guess from a critique standpoint, did you find that there was probably too much gore in this thing? Is that a bad question to ask for a horror film?
No. So here's where I'll say, there was one scene in this film that actually gave me the willies a little bit, and it was that very first pencil through the heel stab.
Oh yeah.
That's the only one that gets me in this movie. But I've had this conversation about other movies and video games in particular with other people, and overly gory, like comically, ridiculously over the top gory is easier to handle than realistic gory.
Yeah.
Right. There's there's a bell curve on that you don't want to be in the middle on. You can either cut away from the gore entirely, or you can show gore that is like, there's not 27 gallons of blood in a person. Come on.
Right.
Or you can, and those are, people can usually handle both of those. But when it's that like ultra realistic level of gore, that is when people get sick and can't handle it. So I think actually this film benefits from being just like comically, like when like the light bulbs start filling with blood and like everything is bloody and it sounds like there's a river of blood running, and Bruce Campbell looks like he came out of a pit of blood for most of this movie. Like I think it benefits from being comically overdone. Like, but that heel scene was gnarly. That was gnarly.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point about how you say like a bell curve, because you're right. There is a point where you're just like, that ain't right, or you're over the top like this, or like Peter Jackson's in one of his first films, Bad Taste, where it's just like over the top, ridiculous bunch of guys making their first film kind of gore. Or I fall more into the camp of like just tamper it down, like not eliminate it, but where like I subscribe to that theory that less is more with the violence and the horror. Kind of like we've talked about on other films. If what you don't show to me is more scary, like my mind will make it way more scarier. But for this one, it kind of feels right to have it over the top. Yeah, I'm fine with the level. I mean, because you're right. There's not that much blood in a human being that can actually continue to drain out into the floor. And one of the things that I noticed that I want to talk about, did you notice the Hills Have Eyes poster that was in the cellar when they went down there? That's got a really interesting story that I didn't know before this, but the story was that Hills Have Eyes poster, which the Hills Have Eyes, if you don't know, is a 1977 horror film from Wes Craven. This family gets stuck in the desert and they're chased by this cannibal family. And it's like one of those horror films in the 70s and 80s that are real gritty like this, and they're kind of disturbing but super popular, especially from the cult following standpoint. But the Hills Have Eyes film in 77 shows a torn Jaws poster in the family's camper, basically as the way Wes Craven was kind of taking a jab at Steven Spielberg, saying, you think Jaws is scary? Hey, watch this. This is scary. So Sam Raimi, to hit back at Wes Craven, he added the Hills Have Eyes poster in Evil Dead 1. And that they thought that was funny, and they kind of jabbed each other for it. So Wes gets back at him in Nightmare on Elm Street. Nancy, the main character, falls asleep to Evil Dead. And it's not like you hear it on the background. It's like 3 or 4 seconds of the camera watching the Evil Dead, and then she falls asleep. So you see what she's watching. Sam gets back at him, Evil Dead 2. I never noticed this, but in Evil Dead 2, there's a Freddy Krueger glove on the wall of the cellar, and then there's another one like right above the door in the shed. And then years later, Wes gets back at him again in Scream, when there's a moment in the film Scream where I guess the kids are all asking, hey, what do you want to watch? And someone says Evil Dead. They're like, no, let's watch Halloween. And so they put in Halloween to watch instead. So it's like this long feud going back and forth that you find between Sam Raimi and Wes Craven that I thought was kind of fun and cool, that I didn't know about until doing a little research for this show. All right, let's talk about some ranking. Our categories: technique, longevity, uniqueness, music, and narrative. And we start off with narrative, and I can jump in for that one if you'd like. My narrative typically falls in a group of categories: acting, dialogue, costumes, story and plot, things like that. And I'll start with acting. We got to be honest with ourselves. It's not good by any means. I mean, even Bruce Campbell, who's better than the rest of them, is not polished. It's pretty rough. The acting they give is pretty rough. Like when after Cheryl gets locked in the basement and Shelley says, for God's sake, what happened to her eyes? It's just really cheesy. A lot like what we saw on Clerks, being a first-time director and using a lot of his friends to act in a film. It's very on par with that. And regarding the dialogue, it's very hot and cold, and there's nothing in between. It's like when the dialogue is bad, it's freezing cold. But when it's good, it's really on fire. So the bad, like you said, I think maybe you and I talked about this before we started recording. When the kids are in the car heading to the woods, the dialogue's bad. It's just like any other general conversation the kids are having throughout this film is bad. But there's some really creepy dialogue, like when Shelley's talking to Scott, thanking him for saving her from the coals, and you have really pretty skin. It's just like some really creepy, odd dialogue that gets to you, or when they're taunting Ash, like when those entities are all taunting Ash, that's when it's really on with the dialogue. But it's hot or cold for me when it comes to dialogue. The costumes, I think it's probably par for the course here with them. You look at the skin, especially on the face, when those entities possess the kids, it doesn't look that great. But, they were doing what they had, first-time filmmakers, very low budget. And there's also an instance where there's actually just flat-out mess-ups. So at the end, when Cheryl's attacking Ash in that final battle, she sticks her hand through the doors, and you just see her hands around him. And they're using gloves to make the hands look all distorted and scary. And it looks good, but one of the fingers is sticking out through the glove. Yeah. And it's like a regular human finger. So it just completely ruins the illusion. And that's just a mess up. Like you catch that when you're going back and looking through it. That really ties into the makeup. It's not Hollywood great, but hey, neither are the filmmakers at this point.
Right. And I think a bunch of the things, I agree with you on a lot of that stuff. And I think a lot of those things could be, not as an excuse, but could be explained by budget. I mean, we talk about how much it costs to do extra takes, especially when we're talking about maybe some damaged makeup or prosthetics or the glove, right? They can't just have 30 of those gloves on hand for if something happens to one, right? Mm-hmm. They've got to make do. So some of that stuff is not easily corrected when you're talking about a budget this small. Even, I mean, $300,000 is, I mean, think about how ambitious this movie is. Effects and set and camera work, all that stuff, compared to Halloween.
Yeah.
And they're the same budget.
Yeah.
Right. This movie is way more ambitious. Costumes, everything, right? So some of that stuff definitely shows up, right? And that's going to happen. Like I said, it's not an excuse. You can't say, well, it was good for the money, so we're going to move this up. I mean, it is what it is. Yeah. That's where it is. But I think you can find out how they got to where they got.
Yeah, and that's worth noting. If people are listening, trying to figure out, are we docking them for, are we giving them a pass because of it? No. We're not giving them a pass. We understand. I guess it's proportional. I mean, we're not going to take you down to nothing, but you have to pay for that. That's going to cost you to some degree.
I think where we might see, I don't know, because we haven't done a movie that was bad like this, but this example I'm going to give. But I think we look at this and we rate this for what it is, and we see the first-time director, a lot of first-time actors, a lot of budget constraints and stuff, and we see how good they did, and we rate it what we rate it, wherever it might be. And I think we give it a fair rating. I think if this was a $20 million movie, we would probably score this lower.
Yeah.
I think the budget would play if it was really bad for the money. Right? I don't think it gets a pass for being good for the money. But I do think we would probably penalize a movie that was supposed to be like a huge blockbuster, had big names and stuff, and then was this flat in spots. I think we'd probably come down harder. I don't know, because we haven't seen that, so I don't know how it would actually work out in practice. But I think just human nature-wise, you'd see a bunch of huge names and a huge budget and be like, where did the money go? What happened here? Right? And I think
did Bruce Campbell buy a new watch?
Right. That would probably tarnish the score a bit, but we're not giving bonus money because they didn't spend a ton.
Yeah. And that's why we do it case by case, and we don't lump films together and say, that it's case by case.
That's why we avoid
anything
comparing.
in life. Yeah, very, very much so. The last thing I had was about story and plot, And I thought, so maybe people hear that and think, why do they always say that, story and plot? Think about, for us, at least how we appraise. Think about this, the narrative's timeline, and you think about plot being a point on the timeline and story kind of being the lines that connect the plot. So that's why we always say story and plot. I think for story and plot, I think it's a great setup for a horror film, especially if you subscribe to, there's a guy named Blake Snyder, and he writes this very famous screenwriting book or script writing book, however you want to call it. And this falls into the categories of these 10 types of films that he talks about. And this one's a monster in the house. And that's exactly what this is, right? So it's a great setup for a horror film. The way they portrayed Linda, his girlfriend, man, that is creepy. Like, especially when she starts singing and things like that. And the plot point where Cheryl's locked in the basement when it all starts going down, that was genius plot point, because it gives them an ability to provide some calm right after. So, you get the pencil scene going haywire. Things are going crazy. They lock her in the basement. It provides a reason to like calm it down. They didn't get rid of her. They just pushed her away for a bit.
And that's important. It's important to point out that if they hadn't done that, the pace of this film, if they had not found a way to trap her, the pace of this film would have been overwhelming. For the audience. Absolutely. You need to
breathe, right?
Breathing points, right?
Yeah.
And you can skip breathing points in some movies. The first one that comes to mind for me was 1917, where that was pretty hectic the whole time. But that was an intentional choice, and it was for a reason. But the pace was never as fast as the fast-paced stuff in here is either.
Yeah.
Right? If you had a whole movie that was the speed at which this film goes when it gets going, the audience would check out. It would be too much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just too much for a person to not to handle, because it's scary. It's just the pacing. Like, you just can't.
It would be
a great film doesn't do that.
I shouldn't say this. It would be The Rise of Skywalker.
That's not an unfair comparison, because it does not stop going from the beginning to, like,
everybody who saw that movie the first time they watched it said, I don't know what happened.
Pacing issues. Yeah.
There was pacing issues. I don't know. I lost track of the story an hour in. I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely fair. Sad, but true. Another great thing about that Cheryl being locked in the basement is that adds a different type of fear or a different scare tactic in this film, in a more psychological element that affects all the characters, because she's not going to get them unless she breaks out, but she's constantly taunting them. And to me, that's where this whole story really excels. Like, I think that's where this film is really at its best. Like, when Ash is completely in the thick of it, and he's just being terrorized by all these entities, not being chased or attacked, but when they're just like harassing him or taunting him. I think that's where this film excels, but it's to me, it's not enough to bring it too high. So I'm floating around 10,500. All
right. So I interjected some and got some of my own points in already, and you already got most of my points, but I'm not far from you. I do think Bruce Campbell is good, but not great in this. And I also think he's the only one that approaches good, at all. Although I just blanked on her name, and I do know that Sam Raimi did sub in that outfit some.
Right. Yeah.
I do have some praise and sympathy for being stuck in that thing for long shoots. Like you said, the overall story for this is a pretty standard ghost story, like out of your book of ghost stories at the core. It's executed pretty well, and they do add on to it in their own way in a few spots. I think the strength of this film is where, like you said, where you get this is going to come for me, I think, more later in other category, but I think it's the Sam Raimi-ness of the taunting and the kind of sarcastic, name another movie with a sarcastic demon in it
Right.
at this time in this time period, right?
Yeah.
Like some of that stuff really lands here, but the most of this movie narrative is not a strong point. I don't think it's ever bad. I don't think there's much in this that I look at and go like, ooh, that's not good. But I don't think any of it really excels. And I came in flat even at 10.
Yeah, that makes sense, because where it's strong in one subcategory of narrative, it's weak in another.
A little
one.
weak in another, and
Yeah.
it's not super strong in any of them, and it's not super weak in any of them. It's very like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
fine.
think that's fair. Yeah,
Narrative's
right.
fine.
It's fine. It's fine. All right, we're gonna go with 10,250 for narrative.
Yeah, I love it.
Because I stole some of your narrative points. I'll go first on music, but I'll let you go first on my favorite, on technique. So,
Okay, all right.
all right. So I'll do music next. I thought the score overall, for me personally, I like the score. It's very synthy, if that's a word. I'm making it a word. It's very synthy in parts. You know, like when those synth parts come on, like it just immediately makes me think of Basement, the Basement, like the podcast, The Basement. And it reminded me a lot of the score. It reminded me a lot of Halloween, right? Like kind of like what John Carpenter did for his film score. I liked it a little bit more than what Joe LaDuca did here for the Evil Dead. But from an appraisal standpoint, I just like the score for what it's supposed to do. I think it just does its job. It doesn't use music when it shouldn't, and it uses the things it should when it does, like some strings to invoke tension, like when Cheryl's in the woods checking out the voice she heard, or when something's about to happen, or you think something's about to happen. But me liking it doesn't appraise higher. I mean, remember, this is still a question about what is the music worth. So I've got music at 8,000.
All right, so we've got a little gap here.
Okay.
But I think I'm pretty flexible on music, to be honest with you. So for me, it's certainly not iconic. Nobody knows the music from this movie. It didn't transcend. It didn't define anything. It's not the score from Halloween, right? It didn't take away from the film at all either. Like, there's never a scene in this film where I felt like, oh, what is this music? Well, there was a scene where I thought, oh, what is this music? And it was the sing along in the car.
Yeah.
But I actually think that is, I don't detract for that, because to me that was, oh, what is this music, in a kind of funny way. And I think that was intentional on Sam Raimi. I think that was like almost like, that feels like a Sam Raimi kind of move that fits in his weird, the weird humor that he has in his later films. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was just by chance. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't an intentional decision. And,
but even so, I'm going to use a term you used last week, which I forgot to completely give you some praise on the air about it. That music that we heard is diegetic,
right?
And for people who don't know, that's like part of the film itself. It's part of the fabric of it. It's like you hear Tarantino put the music on the radio and things like that.
It's like if the people in the way it was described to me the first time I heard it, which made it really easy to remember, was if the characters in the film can hear it, it's diegetic, and if you can hear it but they can't, it's not diegetic.
That's exactly, and that is something you folks can take. That is film 101 right there.
That's a fancy word.
That is a fancy word.
I like that word. I use it a lot. People always give me side eye.
They're like, hey, listen to this podcast.
Hey, we'll teach you a thing. One thing. In 25 episodes, we'll teach you one thing.
Slowly. We'll get there. Form cut and diegetic. Now you know
it. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. All done. So yeah, the music didn't take away, didn't really add much. There was a couple of scenes I thought where I noticed it in a positive way. There wasn't any scenes that I noticed it in a negative way. But I was right down the middle. I was right at 10. It was just, again, another category that is just fine. Yeah. It's like, it's not hurting the film, but to me, it wasn't pushing the film to be in a better direction either.
All right, let's go with 9,000. I was at 8. You're at 10. Let's go with 9,000 for music. unless you want to die on the hill.
No, there's nothing in this music worth dying for. Right? It's so it's so average, right? Like that's the thing, is it's not bad. It's just so right down the middle that whatever, right? Like
that's a hard one to argue.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna let you take technique since I stole some of your narrative.
All right, I know this is your baby, so I'm not gonna take everything. I'll read like half what I got here because I know you're excited to talk about this. You have been like subtly hinting about how excited you are about this technique for like 2 weeks. So I'm gonna make sure to leave you some of it here. But
all right, thank you.
There is just some, I mean, like, I'm going to remind everybody before I start talking, even though I've already said this a couple of times, this is a shoestring budget from a 20-year-old who hasn't made a movie, right? He'd made an Evil Dead short, actually, The Book of the Dead, which is what this was originally called before it got renamed post-release. But he hadn't really done anything. He'd made a couple little things, but this is like his big debut. He's 20 years old. This film has some stunning camera work for what they've got.
Very mature camera work,
super mature camera work that you would be praising somebody 20 years in the industry for using, right? Yeah. Like not like, oh, this is good camera work for a 20-year-old. This is good camera work for somebody who's been in the industry forever. This is, I mean, right from the beginning. I mean, a lot of the point of view from the demon curse, whatever, a lot of that point of view work is really good. The first shot that really stood out to me, I was like, oh, this is going to be a thing, was the fast, low sweep in towards the cabin, or towards the road. Yeah. Right over the water. And immediately I was like, oh, that's impressive for what this movie is. I mean, I've seen this movie a bunch of times. It's been a few years, and I've never looked at it with critical eyes. And I saw that, and I went, huh, man, I never picked up on how good that shot was. And then there was another shot right afterwards that I was like, oh, and I didn't pick up on how good that shot was. And then there was another shot right after that, and I went, wow, there's a few good shots here right in a row. And then it just kept happening over and over. I mean, I'm not going to list out every good shot in this film. I'm sure you're going to have some examples you want to bring up. There is one shot that I absolutely love. Like, I might go pull it out to make it a wallpaper or something. It's just so good. And it's honestly a pretty simple shot, but it is when Ash is bringing Cheryl to the car to take her back to town. And he's walking her out to the car, and they look back to the cabin, and it's all smoky. And the three other friends are standing in the doorway, backlit by the light inside the cabin. And I don't know, maybe I'm giving this shot too much credit, but if you look at that shot, when you finish recording, you go look at that shot and tell me that the smoke and light and the way they have those people positioned does not look like angel wings coming off the center, off the dude in the center.
I am watching it right now. When we record, I leave the film playing off on a monitor to the left, and I'm looking at it right now, and you're dead on. Man.
Dude, it's
exactly what it looks like.
Such a good shot. It looks like an 80s metal album cover. It is
right.
It is so good. That shot, it's like I said, that is actually not one of the better camera work shots. That is just a good frame and good lighting. That's a really simple
well
shot,
backlit,
and it looks great. And this film has all the way on both ends of that spectrum. There are a bunch of really simple shots that are just the care to put them in the right spots with the right framing and the right lighting is shown, and they look great. And there are dynamic camera work. There's shaky cam, which I know you're going to talk about, so I won't harp on that too much. There's shaky cam shots and some like vertical pans and stuff that are just gorgeous, and it's everything in between. It really does hit the right shot for the scene over and over, and it looks great. There's a couple of spots where I thought the lighting was a little weird. The scene where Ash is walking into the basement to get carrying the lantern to get more shells. That lantern is like scorching his hand off turned up, and he's clearly not lit by the lantern. There's like a spotlight on him. And the light the light on him is not natural light. It's not flickering to match a lantern. There's clearly a brighter light than the lantern cast on him. Which, whatever, you need to be able to see him. That's a nitpick.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm looking at it too. Yeah, it's a good call.
There's a few other spots where the lighting wasn't perfect, but for like 99% of this film, everything is just really well shot.
Without overdoing it.
No,
like
yes, exactly.
It's not like Sam Raimi opened up a film book on camera techniques
and put everything in right.
I'm going to do all these. It just, they all work so organically. They're exactly what that scene needs.
Exactly. Like I said, it's the right shot for the scene over and over again. And like a lot of those scenes, you're watching them, and like I was about halfway through, I started like really getting really, really excited about the cinematography in this film. And I started trying to think, like, would this look different now? What would I do different? What I would, and we could actually see what Sam Raimi would do different, because he basically remade this movie. But what would he do different? And honestly, there's not much to change, right? Yeah. It's really, really well done. There's also some really well placed, and I think this is actually where my highest praise of Bruce Campbell is too. There are some really well placed ultra close ups on Bruce Campbell.
Yeah,
where he's just acting with his eyes, pretty much.
The scene where they do the eye shift back and forth when he's about to give her the necklace.
Yes,
that's it.
And he does a great job, and the scene is spectacular, shot that way.
Mm-hmm.
I just over the. I'm like I wouldn't. There are things, right. This is not. I don't have this at 20,000. There are things that could be better, but really impressive and not factored into the score at all. This is a 20-year-old on his feature debut with a shoestring budget. I mean, it's impressive. It's so impressive.
Knocking it out of the park. I mean, it's so
shocking.
I'm not comparing this thing to Citizen Kane by any means, but the same thing happened there. The same thing happened there with Orson Welles, his very first film. In the camera work you see in Citizen Kane, you're like, this is ridiculous. And that's the same feeling you get when you watch the camera work in this film. And it makes it so odd because it's just like an over-the-top, friends having fun, gory horror film. And so you don't expect that. That's what the beauty of it all is.
No, you really don't
see that coming.
I've seen this movie so many times, and I'm going to be honest, the bulk of my viewing experiences of this is my friends, a little insight into the life of Joe. A couple of my close friends and we do these things we've always done, well, I shouldn't say always, since we've been adults, have done called B movies and beers. And
nice.
we buy a bunch of beers and we pick usually junk, but
yeah,
this movie has made it in there a bunch of times too. A couple of other really good ones have made it in there, and we use B movies very liberally. Not all of them are actually B movies, but movies we use B movies kind of as a really fun watch, a good movie to drink to kind of film,
don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah,
Let's
just
have
enjoy
some
it.
laughs,
and
enjoy it.
The bulk of my viewings have been either a first or second movie and a B movie and beer night where I'm drinking, imperial stouts, and probably not in the soberest of conditions. So I've never really picked this thing apart. Watching this, I watched it this morning and right before we recorded. I was like, with a sober, critical eye, I was shocked. Like, minutes into this film, and it didn't go away the whole time.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So
it doesn't go away.
I'm gonna let you talk. I had this at 17.
Okay, we're really close. Let me see if I'm at 17,750. Why in the world did I pick 750? Well, because I got so high on the cinematography and the technique that I had to see what does 17,750 or what does 17 to 18 do to it. And I docked it down a little below comparing it, because I just side by side where we have technique ranked on other films at 18, I couldn't get myself to there. But I had to get it above the 17,500 that we had in there, which was The Matrix, and for what it did. All that aside, technique, man, it's so good. This is why this is, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a horror guy. I don't get into it, but this is why you heard how excited I was in the last episode. And a few people called me out on it too, saying, hey, you usually don't say the name of the film when you tease the next episode. I just can't contain myself because there's so much going on in terms of the camera technique. There's other things in technique too that we usually talk about, and I'll build up to it. Practical effects. The gore's over the top, yeah. And that's okay. That's fine with me. That's what this film is supposed to do. But there are also some pretty cool, just regular practical effects that they do. In particular, the mirror scene where they used water. You know, maybe that water could have been a little thicker, but that's kind of cool the way they did that. With special effects, we already talked about the smoke that goes over the moon. The time lapse effect that they did at the end when the book's thrown into the fire, it's not horrible. It reminded me of the Time Machine, the film from, is it the 60s something, Time Machine film, where he goes backwards and forwards in time and you see the time lapse. So it's not awful, but it's fine. The editing at the beginning of this film, it's very well edited throughout. And I think editing you pick up on when something is confusing, because it's hard for us. I get really upset when they do awards like best editing. Yeah, they should recognize editors, but us not being in that editing room, there's no way we could possibly know what that person had to work with, what they had to work with, what they didn't have to work with. To me, it's one of those things like Monday morning quarterback. So what I say with the editing is I'm just going to pick out, like at the beginning, the order that they put the shots was awesome. And so if I'm going to use at the beginning as an example, you've got a mix of these three different things going on, and they're all edited to make sense. You've got the shaky cam, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The shaky cam of the spirit's perspective through the woods. You've got that other truck that's driving. You've got the folks in the car, and they edit those three different things going on so that you understand what's going on. Those are three separate things happening. They edit it, and it all makes sense. And then they use editing for humor, like where Scott honks at the truck and then the locals start waving. It's just silly humor, but that's completely through the editing process. Something that needs to be stated, little known fact, and this will all make sense when you start seeing these individuals tie together in their film careers. So the film was edited by Edna Ruth Paul, but Joel Cohen was the assistant editor on this. Joel ended up using Edna as an editorial consultant when they did their first film after with Blood Simple. But just knowing that you've got individuals like Joel Cohen, the fact that you've got that kind of talent editing, that makes or at least assistant editor who's probably doing the bulk of the dirty work.
Right.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense on why it looks so good. But camera. So we have to bring up the shaky cam, and they created something like we talked about with The Matrix, where they came up with bullet time. These guys created something very significant for the industry. I'm not going to say they were the first ones to do it, but they were the first ones to do it to make it a thing. Like maybe somebody did this at one point and then it was never used again. But these guys did something significant for the industry, and that's the shaky cam. So Sam Raimi and his cinematographer, Tim Fillo, they take this camera and they bolt it to a 2x4. It's like 2 foot long 2x4, and they bolt the camera to it. And then you get a grip on each of the board ends, and you get this nice point of view shot that's moving around and over and past things. It's that entity's point of view when it's in the woods. And that's a device that you see in the opening titles where the entity's going through, but it's also something that you see get carried over, now it starts making sense, where the Coen brothers start using it. They used it in their first film, Blood Simple. They used it a little bit, but you really notice it in Raising Arizona. If you go back and watch Raising Arizona, you'll see it most prominently. You'll see it. They use it a few times, but you'll really notice it in the sequence where the the lone biker of the apocalypse rides over the fountain, and he goes like up the ladder. Let's see, and he breaks into the Arizona's nursery. That's the shaky cam that they used and they came up with on The Evil Dead, which is a great use of that camera because this film has a lot of opportunity for point of view shots. There's some other things that we get in the opening that's some really unique style of camera work. You get the back and forth kind of like tennis match style of panning. It's not a quick pan, but it's just a side-by-side tennis match of panning back and forth during a conversation. And then you get the tracking shot as we see the car approaching the cabin. And that's like 2 minutes into it. You're getting all this stuff so far that I've basically talked about. And then there's just a ton of little touches and just different types of camera styles. The cut scene where Cheryl draws the picture of, and then we see the cellar door shake, and then you cut to the bloody drink with the blender right in the middle of the shot. It looks bloody. It's not a bloody drink, but it looks like a bloody drink. And then they move it and the scene opens. That same dinner table, they preview what's going to happen a little bit where they show, I think it's Cheryl, but right behind her head is the cellar door. And they show her a couple times at the dinner table. And then we get another shot of her, and that cellar door flies open behind it. You saw the cellar door the whole time, but you didn't know you saw it. Ash, when he goes down into the basement, we get that circular pan around. We get a view of what the basement or the cellar looks like. We get those shots like the cellar door. You're looking up the cellar door, exactly what Tarantino does with his trunk shots. He does that all the time. You mentioned the eyes. I put that down as a note. That's something that's fantastic in its use with the extreme close-up with the eyes when Linda gets the necklace. We get Dutch angles when Ash is is looking for he has the shotgun and he's looking for the cabin. They do something really interesting with those Dutch angles where they have the Dutch angle and they straighten it out, kind of like we talked about on Titanic. The shit straightened out the Dutch angle, but this was like the Dutch angle straightened out, but it was cut to upside down behind Ash, and then it goes like over his head to square things back out again. It's a great use that follows the flow of the film, like something's wrong, and then it's okay, and then it's wrong again. Just like the film does, we talked about with the pacing, like something's wrong, and then it's calm, and then it's wrong again. And it also gives you a little bit of delirium when you do that flip over. So I'm not going to harp too much, but composition was fantastic. My favorite shot was not long after your favorite shot, when the bridge is out and they frame Ash and Cheryl between the broken trees. And then the camera raises up and you've got this nice lit scene with the car headlights. And then the score's actually, I did notice the score there. The score was really well done in that part. We see you look through the floor slats a lot of times too. But my absolute favorite part about the whole technique is when the blood drips on the projector lens and it like covers Ash in this wash of blood without splashing any blood on him. It's like my kind of less is more. Just genius. All right. And I'm not going to say that this film doesn't have faults. I will not deny that it does have some things. Like the opening scene with Ash and Linda, where he gives her not the opening scene of the movie, but the opening shots of where Ash and Linda, when he gives her the necklace, it's just straight up out of focus. Like it's just not even in focus. Yeah. So it's not perfect. And you can definitely tell where they ran the film backwards for some practical effects. If you watch the infamous Vine scene, you can see when those go around Cheryl's neck in the woods, like that's definitely running it backwards, and you can tell. But I am extremely high. I'm at 17,750. Where were you at again? You said 17.
Yeah, I was at 17, but I think honestly, with that small of a gap and for how good this film is, I can just come up to you.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to argue if you come up. 17,750. Let's go with that. And I'll let you take longevity again. I took the first two. Why don't you take these next two first?
All right. Longevity. I think this is a big one for this film. Not as big as technique, but I think it's a big one. This has cemented itself as a cult classic, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The franchise, this started a franchise that became well known. I mean, even I think a lot of people back into this film. I think a lot of people see Army of Darkness first and come backwards to this one, but they still get here, right? This is still a film. This is a film that I know for a fact from discussions with like younger family members and family members of friends. This is a film that like young people are still finding today and enjoying. Maybe it's in a little more campy way now than it was in 81, but still finding it and enjoying it. Ash has become a pop culture icon. He's been in comics. Until very recently, which I don't know if it's still on or not. I should have checked before, but I didn't. He has or had a Showtime TV Ash vs. the Evil Dead.
Yeah.
That's like now times, right? He's been in a bunch of video games. He's been the inspiration for characters in video games. He's actually been in games. He's gotten the chance in comics to take on in like official, not like fan made, but in big comic brand releases to take on Jason and Freddy. He's been in with the Reanimator. He got to go. There was a whole run over at Marvel that was Marvel Zombies versus the Army of Darkness. That was Ash against Marvel heroes that had turned into zombies. It was like a limited Halloween run. There was a comic branch. There was like a whole comic thing with where Ash was a hero going around doing hero things, and there was an issue of that where he went and saved. It was the Army of Darkness saves Obama was the name of the run, and he goes and saves Obama. Like, it's silly things, but it's very in fitting with where that character goes over time.
Yeah,
and it, the character has evolved a lot from this film, but this is where the character started, and this film has a legacy not only in the technique stuff and in pop culture narrative where there are references to this film on screen in a bunch of movies where they make little nods to this. The character has gone on to take a whole. I mean, there a Dark Horse Comics had a recent run that was just an Ash run, and like I believe it was T-Flu, one of our listeners in the Discord, pointed out that we didn't give Mike Myers and his mask and all that enough weight when we talked longevity. I think Ash is a really important thing to bring up here. We did not see Chainsaw Arm in this, but we saw the chainsaw, we saw Ash, and this is the foundation for what becomes Chainsaw Arm Ash that is the thing that people know. We also get the Necronomicon, and like while the Book of the Dead, this kind of fiction exists in a few places, not exactly as this, but kind of in, this is not a unique idea, this book. Prior to this, every time it comes up from this movie forward, it looks like this Necronomicon. This book, this interpretation, this version became the Necronomicon going forward. That like skin-faced, stretched onto the, like, that is just the thing now. On top of all of that, I think this film does hold up in the gory horror film genre. The fans of that genre still go back to this film, and I think they will continue to, just in that aspect. I think the ambition of the practical effects pays off. Like I talked about, the budget on this film and the budget on Halloween matching, being very close time-wise in release, and the ambition and the practical effects and stuff is not in the same ballpark. This film, way more. And I think how hard that stuff landed really pays off too, because while it might not all look real, most of it looks really good. Like for the time period, when you go back and look at these gory practical effects in the late 70s through early 80s, a lot of them look a lot worse than this, and they look good enough to land for this to me. And I think that Sam Raimi campiness, that the like sarcastic taunting demons and stuff and the little jokey bits here and there kind of help too, because I think some of that, the way that humor plays, does not expire, right? That is not the kind of humor that has a time limit on it. That's not referential or bound by current events or anything. That is just kind of like timeless, evil, taunting, whatever. And it's not in your face humor either. It's kind of subtle stuff. And I think some of that campiness helps bring in newer audiences. I think it's way easier to keep an audience with a laugh if you can get them to laugh than it is to keep them with a scare, because there's a lot of scares out there. There's not a lot of laughs. So I think that helps too. So overall, I mean, I put all that together, and you put the just the monumental pop culture influence that this film has had since and continues to have. I put this at 14.
I'm at 13, but you actually brought up a couple points I didn't have, and it makes me happy to because this is not for an analysis like this, that we're not doing this solo. Like, we actually talk about how we got to that point, because I missed some things. I just flat out missed a couple of things that you mentioned. Some of that being with the video game portion, and just thinking about any con that you go to, you're always going to find Ash with chainsaw hand. Like, he's always going to be there. But I'm at 13. Let me get to what got me to 13. The shaky cam, like, it's worth mentioning. I mean, that was something that you see elsewhere in film, so it's got longevity, clearly. And this was a film that was very inspiring to other independent filmmakers. And we talked about already with the Coens and them taking off with it. But you're right, this film inspired a whole franchise and a reboot and a television series. And you mentioned with video games, I wouldn't be surprised if Doom, this is like, Ash feels like Doom sometimes to me when I watch that, especially with the point of view stuff.
Right.
But what really jumped me up was the whole, and when I say this and then I think about what you added that I didn't have, that I'm coming towards 14, I guess is what I'm saying. But the whole cabin in the woods thing, which I do talk about a little bit, or I do have it a little bit in uniqueness. This wasn't the first one that had a cabin in the woods, but this helped establish that type of film that we see. And some people have even taken it further. Go watch the movie, A Cabin in the Woods. They took this trope that was really popularized by The Evil Dead, and they completely turned that trope around on its head. So this thing's just birthing complete different genres and ideas. So I think from that standpoint, it really jumps me up high. Unfortunately, a lot of the quotes that we get from this franchise do come from the other films, so there's not a whole lot of quotes that you can pull out of this one.
I would honestly say that I haven't watched Evil Dead 2 in a bit, but if I was to go forward to Evil Dead 2, I think I would probably rate longevity even higher on that one, because you do get a bunch of the quotes. Mm-hmm. You do get a bunch of the GIFs and images that you see floating around. You do get the chainsaw arm. You do get, and it is also, I think it's 6-7 years later, something. I think it's in that area, 6 or 7 years later. It looks better.
It does look a lot better, and it's got that. It's got a little bit more of that campiness to it,
and it leans way into that campiness that the franchise becomes known for. Mm-hmm. And so while I give this a lot of points for being the origin for that stuff, I think I would probably give Evil Dead 2 a little more for actually having some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But my point with this being the origin is that no one watches Army of Darkness and then says, oh, I should watch Evil Dead 2, and then watches Evil Dead 2 and then just stops.
Yeah.
Right? It always come back to Evil Dead 1, and everybody is always impressed with it. Mm-hmm. No one's ever upset that they watched this. So it's hard for me to say, well, it doesn't have the chainsaw arm, so we can't give it any points for that. Because it's where it started. It's the genesis, Yeah,
and you saw that in the shed with them taking out the chainsaw for Linda. You're like, do it.
I had a thought when he grabbed that chainsaw. I was like, oh my God, I just had the same feeling I have on an MCU rewatch when I watch like Iron Man and see him like Iron Man 2 and see him like kick Captain America's shield out of the way when he's cleaning up at the office before the first Captain America comes out, or like little hints and things here and there. They're like way before they pay off. I remember I definitely had that scene like, oh my God, him just moving that chainsaw is like such a nod to what's about to come. And I'm sure he didn't know that at the time, but
but you feel like you're in on it, right?
I feel like I'm in on it. But who knows? Like I would love to see if like he wanted to have chainsaw arm and did not have the.
I mean, it's very possible. Look at the group he was running around with. He was running around with the Coen brothers too. And if you look at the Coen brothers films, it's I don't think it's a universe, but there are references to future films in earlier films, like in Raising Arizona, on the badge on the guy's shirt says Hudsucker Industries. Well, it won't be a few years later before they come out with the Hudsucker proxy. So it's like, I mean, it's very possible he could have been thinking about that for later and couldn't do it.
I mean, the budget constraints on this were a real thing, right? Like, it's I had read some trivia about them on budget where they were so close to coming in over budget and having to stop that they had like serious cuts on set as far as like amenities, cast and crew amenities and stuff. Like they were really struggling to keep this thing in budget. They were tight. And so I could see where a big practical thing like that chainsaw arm, like a functioning chainsaw wearable arm thing, may have been difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
which we might have got if they hadn't taken this thing on the road. I believe they were in Michigan. I want to say Minnesota, but it could be Michigan where they were all from. But they couldn't. It was something like they couldn't do the cabin in the woods there, that the location they wanted to, because of the climate. So they went down to Tennessee, and the opposite happened. Like maybe it was like the driest year or the wettest year, vice versa. So they didn't go to Michigan because it was going to be like too wet or something. So they went to Tennessee. It ended up being like the wettest year ever for Tennessee and the driest year ever for Michigan. So maybe taking on the road's expensive. Maybe they could have had that budget if they wouldn't have taken on the road. And maybe it wasn't wet, or maybe it was cold and hot or something like that, but it was definitely climate related what caused them to shift the location.
And I couldn't find a direct quote. I had read something that was like third party. Somebody said that Sam Raimi said, but it wouldn't surprise me because you do see instead of a group of friends, it's a couple in the second movie, right? But it's kind of the same movie. Yeah. I saw like a third party account that said that Sam Raimi was kind of shocked at how fast blowing through money was with a bigger cast, and it was a decision making point. Even though he had a way bigger budget in the second film, I think it was like an order of magnitude. I think it was $3 or $5 million for the second film. He still was like skittish about trying to make this film with a bigger cast because he did not want to deal with the incurred
the
costs.
Lodging, the food, everything that comes with that.
I think he regretted having a bigger cast almost immediately when he started running out of money almost immediately. And I think that probably is an accurate, like I said, I only found third party accounts of him saying it. They didn't say it like in any interviews. So I don't know, you can't say for sure, but it plays out that way, right? He does go to a small cast for the second try. So
that's true.
And Evil Dead 2 is basically this movie, but
it is.
But with a couple instead of a group. I mean, it's Bruce Campbell, Cabin in the Woods. They play a recording that a college professor, but instead of a group, it's a couple and it's campier. So I think that probably played in, and I think we probably got some of that stuff we didn't get to see because of that.
Well, as the Strokes said, all right, you convinced me. So I'm coming up from 13 to 14 because there was some things I missed. So I'd like to do 14 for the longevity.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Deja vu. And so uniqueness, this is always where I feel like I taper off. The bell curve of technique gets me all the time. With uniqueness, written and directed by Sam Raimi. So original screenplay, always great for some points. But we definitely get, I don't know, it's kind of like with the dialogue. Like we get the tropey of the tropes. I don't know if you can say that, but you know what I mean. And then you do get some tropes averted. Like we get the which key is it trope, like when the spirit's attacking Cheryl. Oh, okay, yeah, so that's a thing. But that they do avert some tropes, like the car won't start, where Cheryl wants to go back into town. You're like, here we go. But then when Cheryl says something about they don't want us to leave, the car starts right up.
Yeah, it's not going to start. Okay. They don't want us to leave, and then it immediately starts.
Exactly. So you're like, okay, so averted. But again, this thing made the Cabin in the Woods a trope thing. It made it a thing, which it did exist, right? But not like this. So I'm just a hair over the halfway mark. I'm at 11,000 for uniqueness.
All right, so I'm kind of in the same spot here. So like you said, original screenplay. There's a little innovation here with the shaky cam. The two things that really stood out as far as this category for me. So like you said, there's a ton of tropes, and I actually think this is not a pro for uniqueness to all these tropes, but I do think it's a plus for the film, because I think this category of horror film, the people, it seems to me, like I said, neither one of us are big horror fans, but it does seem to me that the horror fan, the people who go back to these movies over and over again, kind of love those tropes, right?
Yeah.
So they want to see them. Subverting a few, I think, it goes over well, but I think they want to see this stuff. I think they want to see the thing, right? I said, though, there is a couple, like you mentioned, the Cabin in the Woods being kind of maybe not originated, but platformed here so that it would take off. The two things that I had here that really separated this from the other horror films at the time in this genre, although I do think you see some of it now, I think the influence that you see it now kind of comes from these films, and you see it way more in the subsequent films. The first is that kind of campy sense of humor. Horror films were not necessarily also kind of comedies in the 70s and 80s. There, you might get a line here or there where they're just trying to break up some of the tension, but like I don't remember ever seeing a trash talking demon with their head poking out of a hole in the floor, right? Like that kind of stuff is kind of amazing, and it's the stuff that I do like in the genre, and I think you see that start here. The other thing, if you look back at big name horror films, kind of all the way back, the best, and you ask for examples of the best cinematography, you're going to hear about things like the shower knife scene in Psycho and stuff like that. But the cinematography in this film is on a different level.
Yeah.
The cinematography in this film is gorgeous, and that's not a thing they usually take the time for in this genre. Like
that's just something the filmmaker has to know.
Right.
When he's planning it out. I want the camera right here and grab that and this, and yeah, it's something that's
it's a
just
care
known.
that you don't see a lot of. And I mean, you don't see this level of cinematography in a lot of big budget films now. Like, to be honest, a lot of big budget films now are still kind of like, let's just throw all the special effects and the camera doesn't do much. That's not an uncommon approach still. The artistry in the cinematography on this is really impressive, and I think it really separates this out into a different category. I mean, the only other horror film we've really talked about here on the show was Halloween, and while there was a couple of good shots, the bulk of that was like square frame, center frame shots, right?
Yeah.
There was not a lot of like really impressive stuff, whereas what I would say with this film, I can't think of hardly any stock standard square frame shots that are just there and that's it. This film, like we said a couple of times earlier, every scene has the right shot for the scene pretty much. And I think that gives this film a unique place in the genre. I think between that and the sense of humor, I can give it some dollars. I can throw some dollar bills at it, and dollar bills, y'all.
And capture that soundbite.
And that's kind of all it's got, though, for this category. So I was not far from you. I was at 12.
Oh, okay. You want to go down the middle with that one? You want to do 11.5?
Yeah, we're close enough. You might as well. I think that's a fair.
And point of order here, I kept saying adverted. The tropes were adverted. You actually said it correctly. It's subvert. So, spoiler, spelling and vocabulary was my lowest score in school.
I didn't even catch that. I thought you were saying subverted, so otherwise I would have called you out on it and embarrassed you.
Oh, goodness. All right, well, that gives us our categories. That's going to total us for The Evil Dead, 62,500. Man, it just shows you how well-rounded you really got to be to get up there. It really does. What does that put us on the guest list?
So that puts, it's respectable. I mean, it's honestly respectable. It puts us at 16 on the guest list. Right below The Village. Like,
it's knocking on the door. I mean, it's got its foot in the door.
$250. It's,
yeah.
I mean, I kind of want to throw it a $250 bonus for all the blood. $251 for $1 for every gallon of blood used. But also right above, just about $1,200 above High Fidelity.
So 16 out of a total. How many we got now on the guest list?
24.
24. Wow. So we started off with a definitive list of 25, which we've maintained 25, but we only had 25 at that time. We've already got 24 guest lists, or get films for the guest list. That's interesting. So yeah, 16 out of 24. I mean, but I'll save this. On the definitive list, it comes in at 35 out of 43 films that we have. So didn't quite break the top 25, but in that same place where you mentioned with the guest list, it is right there behind The Village, just ahead of High Fidelity. We look at its 35 through 40, or heck, let's look at 30 through 35. If we look at 30 through 35, that's going to put it at The Third Man is ranked number 30, Usual Suspects 31, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Miss Morgan brought that to us, 32. Galaxy Quest coming in at 33.
I can't help it. Every time a movie comes in below Galaxy Quest, I get excited.
The Village comes in at 34. And then The Evil Dead is 35, just above High Fidelity, The Fifth Element. And it actually is ahead of Halloween. Man, Technique did it for it. It really did.
I mean, I think, I know, man, I've already gotten so much shade for my opinions on Halloween. But I'm just going to double down on it right now and piss everybody off. I think this is objectively a better film than Halloween. I think it is. I mean, the technique does pull this an awful long way, but I think the technique in this film adds to the watchability of this film in a really dramatic fashion.
Oh yeah. You take the technique away, this is a whole different ballgame.
Right, and
everything really suffers. Yeah,
I think this film, if you're going to sit down and enjoy a film, I would take this over Halloween 10 times out of 10. This is a way more enjoyable film to me.
So if you go to the website earglumedia.com/TFA, you have a link there to the definitive list, and you can sort these by rank. This one won't show up on the definitive list because it's not in the top 25, but I can tell you, if you sort this by technique and look at where technique falls for The Evil Dead, it is $250 less than Raging Bull, Chinatown. It's about $500 less than Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's $250 ahead of The Matrix. It's in some rare territory when it comes to technique.
In a wild underdog upset, shockingly, it comes in above A New Hope.
It really does. Yeah.
which is wild to me, but I think honestly,
isolate technique only. Yeah. Does that make sense? It makes sense.
Yeah, especially because we've said a bunch of times, special effects are not the end all be all, and the bulk of A New Hope's technique comes from special effects.
Yeah. It's not the lens. It's adding to the film. Yeah. Very interesting.
That is an upset though. I don't think many people would bet on that going into this, if they hadn't seen this film or had only seen clips of it. I don't think that would be a guess people would make.
So, Joe, we've done a couple of love films in a row, and we finally got that out of the way. We did Evil Dead, which I feel replenished. I feel better putting all that aside.
Yes, the blackness in my heart has re-solidified. I am back to my normal self. I am full of blood and gore again. I'm ready to go.
You just equated love to the blackness in your heart. I like it. We're going to do something different for the next episode. I guess you could call it a special, kind of like this was our Halloween special.
I think it's going to be a special.
Definitely special. We're going to have a close friend of the show, great friend of the network. You all know him. You're familiar. We've harped about it before. One of our favorite podcasts is The Basement.
Yeah, I've been talking about it like every week, every episode for the last like 2 months because it's been so good lately.
Because it's on fire right now.
Yeah,
and it's not going to stop. You guys all know, at least a lot of you in our circle know that Ready Player 2 is coming out too. So we want to team up with The Basement. We're going to do a little bit of a crossover here. We're going to have Albert on. Maybe we get Will on. Will's a tough one to nail down. He's got a tough schedule. But we're definitely going to get Albert on, do a little bit of a crossover. And Joe, we're going to talk about the films that inspired Ready Player 1 in anticipation of the upcoming novel Ready Player 2.
Yeah, and I think this is probably, to set expectations a little bit, it's probably going to be a little more of a free-form discussion and a little less of a formatted ranking kind of thing. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I am really excited both for this crossover and for the upcoming coverage and for the upcoming book, because I just loved the first book. So this is exciting. I'm very excited. I hope all of you are excited. If you've not read Ready Player 1, it's a quick read and it's well worth it.
For sure. Yeah, it is a quick read and it's easy. And you'll like it. If you're listening to this show, you're going to like Ready Player 1, the novel. Sure. And we haven't picked the movies yet that inspired. There's a lot of films that inspired Ready Player 1.
Yeah.
Ernie has a lot of things he likes. Ernie Klein, the author. And I mean, we could be talking War Games, Back to the Future. We could be talking about any of those. So if you've got some idea of what you want us to cover, go ahead and jump on to some of our social media sites. Yeah, you could hop onto Twitter at @appraisers. Probably not going to get a quick response to Twitter. It's not my favorite, as you can tell.
Nope.
But if you want to go to Instagram @filmappraisers, Joe and I both will respond to that very quickly. Filmappraisers@gmail.com is our email. You can get in touch with us at earglumedia.com/TFA, which is our website. You can also get in touch with us if you go earglumedia.com/Discord. You can find us there. You can find everybody there, including some feedback we got recently from T-Flu and Cab. Thank you guys for your input and you agreeing with us on Titanic. We love you even more now. And Joe, this is usually the part where I kind of hand it over to you to talk about the network, but I don't want to do that. What I want to do instead, I want you to talk about something very special that's coming up that you've been working on. Do you want to give the audience a little bit of taste of what's coming down?
So I've been secretly conspiring behind the scenes by myself in my little dark recording room. And I have my own side project launching. Well, tomorrow as we record this, it will be last Sunday as you hear this. But I have The Barrel House, a whiskey podcast, will now be available. The first episode will be available. And it's going to be a one mic, just me, talking about one whiskey or so every other week. So it'll be every 2 weeks the show will come out. And I'm going to maybe pick apart a whiskey and also kind of talk about what's going on in my life, how I got to whiskey, a little bit here and there. They're shorter. They're 15 to 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the episode. But I think you're all really going to like it. It is about whiskey, but I am super nerdy at the core, so they are still pretty nerdy podcasts. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be really fun to kind of learn and explore that hobby with a bunch of people, with listeners, and I'm going to have some guests on. And I've even like been a bad influence and gotten Josh here drinking some whiskey. so
hey, word of mouth is like the best opportunity for advertisement. I don't dislike whiskey. I'm not trying to say that. It's just not what I would usually pick to drink. But I've always wanted to. It's one of those things that, you might be a little too nervous to jump in because you can definitely get in over your head, but it's one of those things that you want to know more about. I'm telling you guys, I've been able to listen to Joe's podcast before he's published it here. The way that it's set up is perfect for those individuals who like me, want to know more about it, and like me are a little bit nerdy, and I don't want to just know more about how it tastes or how it smells or why these flavors are the way they are. There's a little bit of background to it, and you get a little bit of depth to a lot of the why and the how, and there's a lot of questions that I feel are answered, especially for a novice like me. And I'm not going to spoil it, Joe, but I will say your first episode, it's like hands down my favorite whiskey I've ever had. Like I never had it before until you told me. And I think that's what a lot of your viewers are going to get. They're going to find that their palate's going to expand here a little bit, be able to try some things they didn't even know existed with you as the guide. So I highly recommend tuning in for that one. I definitely will be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to turn this into an episode in itself, but like you said,
I'll edit all this out.
Yeah, for sure, right? Like you said, you hadn't had anything that fit that flavor profile, and like we just talked about a little bit. I asked you a couple of questions, and I was like, you know what you're gonna like. I think I know what you're gonna like, and it gave you a pointer. And that's the thing I love about whiskey is that there is so many different flavor profiles. Like, you might not like whiskey. You might just be a person that doesn't like whiskey. Those people exist. That's fine. But a lot of people who say, I don't like whiskey, have had one whiskey and are unaware of the huge variance in flavor profiles that spirit actually has. And my love of I guess call it a hobby or whatever, grew the same way you did, where somebody finally introduced me to the one that clicked, and then I was like, oh, I could do this. I like this a lot. And I'm kind of hoping that I can do that for more people through the podcast.
I think we're going to see people will. Yeah. Well, folks, make sure to check that one out. Also, while you're at it, if you don't mind, hop onto iTunes, rate, review us, come to Discord, let us know what you like, what you don't like. All things that we definitely take into consideration. We're running a little longer than we usually do, folks, but I hope you enjoyed it. Joe, any parting words here for us?
No, I had a great time. I had a great time with this film. I really appreciate the setup for the tremendously long plug, and really jump on, come and say hi, come talk to us. We're always there and looking to interact with you more.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us on this episode. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.
Later.
The Film Appraisers was created by Josh McCrae, produced by Joe Kane and Josh McCrae, graphics by Albert Padilla, and voiceover by Morgan Marshall.
The thoughts, expressions, views, opinions, and the like are those of the guests and the host of the Film Appraisers and do not represent the opinions of any entity associated with the creation or distribution of the films discussed herein.